Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Gender and Development Studies, SOGDS. Postgraduate Diploma in Women's Patriarchy. Understand the dynamics and linkages between production, reproduction, and patriarchy. Locate patriarchy in an anthropological, historical and archaeological perspective. Understand the institutionalization of patriarchy and male dominance through kinship, family and marriage patterns, and understand how caste and patriarchy are interlinked and how caste becomes an instrument of male dominance and patriarchy. 2.1 Introduction. We are living in the so-called modern or by some standards post-modern world, which is based upon the ideology of egalitarianism and universality, but try and look around and you will find lots of examples that are contrary to the general conception about this 21st century. We are still carrying the burden of traditional, divided society which was based primarily on ascribed statuses that ensured the place of a person in a particular community, caste or group by virtue of her birth. In that particular group, prejudice and discriminatory attitude is something that has not changed much over a period of time. This is true even in the case of gender discrimination, which is a manifestation of patriarchal mindset and ideology that stops short of calling this century a truly modern one. While penning down this unit, there is a debate going on in electronic and print media about the issue of male dominance and patriarchy. Cases in point are the recent molestation of a girl by a mob in Guwahati, Assam, and pronouncement of patriarchal diktats by Khap or caste panchayats in Uttar Pradesh. In Bagpat district of Uttar Pradesh, a caste panchayat announced that the women of the village will not carry mobile phones with them and their movement in and around the village will be monitored and restricted. Similarly, in Assam, a girl was molested by a mob publicly and in full view of the media. These incidents also highlighted the insensitivity and callous attitude of some agencies that were supposed to be the custodians of women's rights. This brings us to the point where we should understand and rethink about how our society is structured in a manner that is biased towards the male members and overlook the rights and privileges of women. Rajlakshmi, 2012. Sometimes the state apparatus also behaves and is structured in such a way as to promote male dominance. One can look at the example of Hindu Succession Act, 1956, which was amended in 2005 but still contains provisions that are in favor of women's husbands' family. This act relates with the succession of property. It is stated in the act that the self-acquired property of a woman who dies without writing her will and in the absence of her husband and children will belong to her husband's family and not to her parents. This is a clear reflection of the societal and traditional norm where a woman after marriage is considered to be a member of her in-law's family and not to her natal family. Similarly, in a marriage alliance, a woman is not considered as an equal partner in marital property or husband's property acquired after marriage. This inequality devalues her contribution towards the marital property in terms of her labor that she provides under the rubrics of housekeeping and as a primary caregiver to her children and husband. Singh, 2012, Rao, 2008, Pal, 2004. Beside these examples, there are other more visible instances like sex-selective abortions that indicate towards a generalized discriminatory attitude towards women. These examples also reflect a patriarchal mindset and male dominance. The next section will deal with the definition and theoretical perspectives on patriarchy and male dominance. Activity. Make an inventory of similar issues that depict male dominance. Look around for such examples. Read newspaper and magazines for such news that depict a power relation between male and female. 2.2 Theoretical perspectives on the origin of patriarchy. Now one may wonder, how can we define patriarchy? It is a rather tricky question. As with other kinds of definitions related with social phenomenon and concepts, defining patriarchy in its entirety is not always possible. It is therefore better to understand the concept rather than getting into some watertight definition. However, patriarchy can be defined as a system of social structure and practices in which men dominate, oppress and exploit women. Walby, 1990. This definition clearly outlines the nature of patriarchy which is ingrained in our social structure that gives it a very fundamental character. Based on this social structure, men dominate and exploit women, and their action gets legitimized by the existing structure through institutions like family, kinship, marriage, religion, class, caste, race, etc. Patriarchy envisages within itself a form of power relation between men and women. In this relationship, a hierarchy exists that places men in an advantageous position, and this makes a complete recipe for female exploitation. In a more literal sense, patriarchy, pitrisatta in Hindi, denotes rule of father in a male-dominated family. This rule emerges from an unequal resource distribution like land, which is invariably inherited by the male line of descent. This control over the resources later gets translated into control over the production and reproduction of women. However, later in this unit we will also see that how matrilineal and bilateral kinship structures alter this power relation in family and outside. Feminism as an ideology has always tried to deal with the question and conception of patriarchy. There are different philosophical traditions in feminism that conceptualize patriarchy differently. Prominent among them are liberal feminism, Marxist feminism, and radical feminism. Liberal feminism is based on the philosophy of individual rights. The birth of liberal feminism dates back to the 18th century, when it was realized that women should no longer be subjugated to the authority of males. It was in this context that liberal feminists challenged the customary and legal framework that reflected a biased understanding of women based on their inferior physical and intellectual capabilities, which were used as instruments to subjugate and subordinate women. It is with the writings of Mary Wollstonecraft that one traces the birth of liberal feminism as a separate feminist movement. In her Magna Carta, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Wollstonecraft advocates for equal opportunity for both men and women. She emphasizes that it is imperative that women are educated and made aware of their political and social rights in order to claim equal status at par with men. In the 19th century, John Stuart Mill emerged as the leading scholar of liberal feminism and advocated that women are required to participate equally and proactively in various societal affairs and hence strive for equality. Mill, 1869. Eisenstein, 1981. Liberal feminists advocated that women should not only be confined to the domestic domain, and there should be equal opportunity for them to participate in the public and political spheres of life. According to them, patriarchy has confined women to the four walls of the house, and therefore they need to get liberated in order to come out of the clutches of patriarchy. Liberals attack the myth that women, because of their feminine behavior, are not suited for outside world, and therefore they seek refuge and security within the domestic sphere of life. However, liberal feminism is being criticized on the issue of being very individualistic and therefore totally overlooking the structural, societal, and familial basis for male dominance and patriarchy. Liberal feminists do not take a critical view of family and are focused solely on capturing space and rights for individual women in the public domain. They are also being criticized for being elitist, since most of the rights gathered in this manner will be availed by the so-called upper class, caste women. Therefore, this stream of feminism did not voice the concern of other differentially suppressed women on the basis either of class, caste, race, etc. Again, on the issue of origin of male dominance and patriarchy, liberal feminists are found wanting. They do not provide with a theory that can explain the circumstances that led to patriarchal setup and male dominance in society. This gap was, however, filled by Marxist feminism that deals with the issue of origin of patriarchy and male dominance. Marxist feminists are of the view that patriarchy originated with the origin of private property, Engels, 1948. It is with the emergence of private ownership of property and its transfer through the male line of descent that patriarchy as a social structure was born. They also relate the concept of patriarchy with the capitalist mode of production. However, they have been criticized for just adding the issue of gender to their already existing framework of class oppression. They are also silent on the issue of women oppression before the advent of private property. There are empirical evidences that point to the fact that women oppression and male dominance was present even before the advent of private property. Claude Lévi-Strauss observed that the exchange of women is the basic form of exchange, and it took place because of some taboo on incestuous relationships, sexual relations between close relatives, like father and daughter, brother and sister, mother and son, etc., in each and every society. This kind of taboo required that women be acquired from a group outside one's own, and thus clan, lineage, village exogamy originated. This gave rise to the manipulation of female sexuality and hence the emergence of male dominance. Another group of feminist scholars known as radical and revolutionary feminists tried to understand and explain the origin of patriarchy and male dominance through the notion of female sexuality and its manipulation by the male. They are of the view that biologically women are different from men. This is the basic fact recognized by this brand of feminism. This biological difference defines the role of women as child-bearers. This biological role is, however, translated and interpreted as related to the notion of motherhood, which defines the role of mother in terms of both child-bearing and child-rearing. They are of the view that biology alone is not responsible for such skewed power relations between male and female, but their cultural interpretation is responsible for the same. Gendering of sex takes place in the socio-cultural context. In other words, the control of male over the reproductive capacity of female is the root cause of patriarchy. Sheila Jeffrey, one of the revolutionary feminists, puts her point on the origin of patriarchy by saying that there are basically two systems of class that operate in a society: I, the class based on and originating from the relations of production, and E, the class that is based on and originates from the relation of reproduction. It is the second system of class that is responsible for women's subordination in patriarchy. Similarly, Fenella Mackenzie argued that the first kind of division of labor was between men and women, and it originated from women's reproductive capacity and men's greater strength. This made women dependent on men and thus gave rise to unequal power distribution. However, she also writes that it is not only because of this differential reproductive capacity that subordinates women, but this biological differentiation is turned into psychological dependency by men and the social structure as a whole. This stream of feminism is, however, criticized for being biological determinist and reductionist. It also does not provide any alternative to end patriarchy or improve the condition of women. They advocate that women should be made aware of this kind of subordination, which in turn can help in improving their condition. Beachy 1979, Lewin 2006, James 2010, Rana Day 2007. 2.3 Sexuality of Women and Male Dominance. The male control over the sexuality of women is considered to be a manifestation of patriarchy. This control is exercised by the male within the structure of marriage, family and kinship, especially in the patrilineal societies like ours in India. The institutions of marriage, family and kinship becomes a site for reproducing the patriarchal structures. In a marital alliance, a virgin bride is always desirable. Premarital sex is seen in terms of moral pollution, which is more severe for the women than for the men. It is considered that through the sexual intercourse a woman gets internally polluted, whereas a male only gets external pollution. Internal pollution is related to the pollution of the substance. The concept of substance holds a great importance in maintaining caste distances. Bette, 1991. Dube, 2009. The caste hierarchies and distances are maintained through the concept of selective exchange of women to a certain caste or castes. In this way, the sexuality of women gets connected with the larger social structure based on caste. Again, the concept of hypergamy and hypogamy demonstrates a strict control over the female sexuality. Hypergamy to some extent is permitted where a man of higher caste can have union with a woman of lower caste, but hypogamous unions are strictly prohibited. Even if a woman of higher caste gets entangled with a lower caste male, it can bring serious consequences to both the families. There are numerous such examples where honor killings took place in the name of such unaccepted marital or love unions. This exemplifies that the control over the sexuality of women becomes an instrument of reproducing caste hierarchies. This also exemplifies a kind of corporate control over the sexuality of women. In this kind of control, female sexuality gets attached with the honor of an entire village, caste, community or family, and any infringement over the same can bring a lot of dishonor to the entire group. This kind of corporate control over the sexuality of women is also demonstrated by anthropologists like D.N. Majumdar, who in his monograph named The Himalaya Polyandry on the people of Jaunsar Bawar region of Dehradun documented fraternal polyandrous marriage alliance between a bride and all the brothers of a particular household where the marriage gets solemnized. Here the main issue is related with the right of access to the female sexuality, which by such alliances gets restricted to the family or household as a unit. There are other such studies that have documented the marriage alliance of a bride with several brothers. Other studies have also documented that there is an unwritten rule or an accepted practice where after the death of the husband, the widow has to marry her husband's brother. This can be analyzed in the light of retaining the women and her children, if any, within the family or lineage, so that the right over the father's property remains within the household or family. This indicates a strong feeling of ownership of women, her labor and reproductive power. The patriarchal mindset is quite well observable in Hindu marriage rituals and relations between the bride and groom's family. A kind of power relations exist between the families of bride and groom. The exchange of gifts and dowry indicate this kind of unequal relationship. A bride is considered to be a financial liability and burden over the groom's family, which must be compensated adequately in order to solemnize the marriage. This undermines the productive work which women generally perform within the household. Household chores are considered to be non-consequential as their labor is considered to be non-productive and taken for granted. Therefore, women are rendered powerless both at the level of production and reproduction. At the level of family, the sexuality of women is under the control of her brothers and father. Leela Dubey, 2009, explains this with the help of a very general yet powerful observation that brothers in the context of South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh and Pakistan are provided with the task of keeping an eye on the movement of their sisters. They have the responsibility of protecting their sisters. This kind of responsibility gives them the right to exercise power over the female and dictate their behaviors according to their own whims and fancies. There have been several incidents reported where the brothers killed their sisters, who were found guilty of illicit love or wanting to marry against the wishes of their parents. Exemplifying cases from Andhra Pradesh, Dube states that brothers often scold their sisters if they found them standing at the doorstep during the evening, as they consider it to be gesture adopted by the prostitutes in order to invite their customers. However, Dube further compares the situation of control over female sexuality in patrilineal South Asia with that of matrilineal and bilateral Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia etc. She argues that the kinship system based on matrilineality and bilateral concept has greater tolerance and less control over the female sexuality. She argues that in countries like Malaysia, where Islamic influence is seen, there are restrictions on sexual behavior placed on women before marriage, but such restrictions are also placed equally on the men. It is quite common in Indonesia for women to migrate for work to urban centers and leave their husbands behind to look after their land and children. In Thailand, women take to the profession of prostitution to support their families, but they do return to the mainstream and get married after some time. This cannot even be imagined in the context of South Asia. The basic idea that underlines this behavioral attitude pertains to the fact that men are not the users of women's sexuality. Dube, 1988, 2000, 2009. Activity. Discuss on the issue of sexuality of women depicted in Indian cinema and its impact on the larger society. 2.4 Historical perspective on women's productive and reproductive roles. The relation of production and reproduction needs to be analyzed historically in order to understand the consolidation of patriarchy. Uma Chakrabarti, in her essay on Brahminical patriarchy in early India, tries to understand this relation of production and reproduction during historical periods. She has based her analysis largely on prehistorical, proto-historical and historical accounts and evidences that throw some light on the dimension of women's role both in production and reproduction. Her argument starts with the contention that in the hunting and food gathering stages women's role was not restricted only in terms of reproduction, but they also played active role in food gathering and also sometimes in hunting, which she argues is evident in cave paintings of Bhibeka and other archaeological sites in central India. In many such paintings women are depicted wearing some sort of headgear depicting power and authority and are shown taking part during hunting activities. The reproductive role of women was also considered important since they were considered as life givers and thus having close association with the events of life and death. This belief places women in some sort of mystical and supernatural space which is in sync with the evidence found related with the cult of Mother Goddess. During the Indus Valley civilization, the position of women and the emergence of patriarchy cannot be established based on the evidence since the in situ evidence is not supported by written documents as they are not yet decisively deciphered. However, there are evidences of class formation which are depicted and present in the form of rural and urban centers, citadel, surplus grain stocks etc. Presence of female figurines, mother, goddess icons and dancing girl statues can be seen as pointing towards the important role of women in relation to reproduction. But nothing can be said with conviction regarding the gender relations. It was with the coming of the Aryans that the real consolidation of patriarchy and male dominance took place. It is intended in early Vedic literature that the Aryans had to fight with the indigenous people of the land, and in this fight they conquered their cattle, land and women. This is the first ever historical evidence of women taken as captives by the Aryans. These women then were assigned different roles that related with serving the Aryan race and were also used as gift items, thus depicting a control over their sexuality. Later on, various texts including The Arthashastra and Manusmriti outlines the behavior of women and laid down rules for controlling their productive and reproductive capacities. There are written evidences that are sufficient to show that the state also had some control over the reproductive powers and sexuality of women. In this context, it was laid down that the king can punish a woman for her adulterous behavior. This state control was guided by the principle that the sexuality of women needs to be controlled, and this controlling power lies mainly with the husband after the woman is married. And if the husband is not able to control her, then the state can take action against such culprit. This also had some effect on the role of production of women. With such strict control over her sexuality, she was now mainly confined to the domestic sphere of life. Here also the kind of importance that must be accorded to a woman's productive role was absent. Chakravarti 1993, 2.5 Patrilocality, Matrilateral kinship and patriarchy. Kinship structures form an important part of social organization. Kinship structure of a society decides and ensures the membership of people into various groups. Like in a patrilineal kinship structure, a son remains a member of the family of orientation, whereas the daughter has to leave her natal house and move to the family of her affinal kins after marriage. She becomes a member of her husband's patrilineal. It is through these membership rules that the society perpetuates itself within a definite structure. These kinship structures have special bearing on the perpetuation of patriarchal social structures. The rule of residence after marriage is an important reflection of the principles of kinship. Leela Dube has rightly underscored the relation between rules of residence and kinship principles when she says residence is a material as well as an ideological expression of principles of kinship. pp. 93. In the patrilocal form of residence, a couple after marriage resides with the family of the groom. This kind of residential arrangement is found in large parts of India. It is based on the basic premise that the daughter is not a permanent member of her natal house and she has to move out after marriage. This really has an important bearing on her productive and reproductive capacities and autonomy. It also influences the rules of inheritance and daughters' share in parental property. It is generally argued against the daughter's claim over her parental property that if she gets a share of the property, then it will eventually belong to her husband and her in-laws. Also, the notion of payment of dowry dilutes her claim over the property, since it is believed that the dowry is in lieu of her share in the property. The idea of partilocality entails that a daughter has to sever all ties with her natal house upon marriage. Her in-laws' house is generally a new place where she has limited access and control over productive resources. Her sexuality is also controlled by her husband and in-laws in the form of demands placed on her to give birth to a male child. Dube 2009. As in the case with patrilocality, Karen Kapadia in her study among the Brahmins and non-Brahmins of Arulur village in Tamil Nadu points towards the institution of matrilateral kinship and argues that with the changing socio-economic context, matrilateral kinship is falling into disrepute and is replaced by patrilineal kinship and prevalence of dowry during marriage. This in turn perhaps leads to male dominance and lower status of women in the society. Kapadia explains that among the non-Brahman caste of Arulur village, the matrilateral kin in the form of mother's brother, MB, and mother's brother's son, MBS, holds immense importance in the life of women and her children. MYB, mother's younger brother, and MBS are considered as prospective grooms for a woman's daughter. MB is also obliged to give expensive gifts during the life cycle rituals of his sister's children. This ceremonial gift is known as Sir, which is considered to be a replacement for a woman's share in her parental property. Thus, it is both obligatory and woman's share in true sense, in contrast with the institution of dowry and stridhan practiced among the patrilineal groups. Among the Brahmins of Arulur, the patrilineal kins hold more importance, since matrilateral kins do not provide prospective grooms for marriage. Women are married to complete strangers as compared to the MBS or MYB in case of non-Brahmins. This accounts for forming new relations among the in-laws as compared to more familiar relations in the latter case. However, with the passage of time, even among the non-Brahmins, matrilateral kins are losing their importance and dowry is gaining ground, since a dowry marriage is considered as high-status marriage, and thus people are keen to make it a part of their symbolic capital. pp. 861. This has far-reaching implications for women's subordination and male dominance in the society, as the negotiation and practice of dowry makes bride's family subordinate to the groom's family. Kapadia, 1990, 1993, 1994. This metamorphosis from bride price to dowry in marital alliances is also evident among the Gonds of Vidarbha in Maharashtra. The reason for such a transformation can be located in increased interaction of this tribal group with the larger society, where dowry is the norm. It is a result of peer pressure and a fear of ridicule that is generated if things are not according to the wishes of dominant social groups in an area. This again bears certain consequences for female subjugation and subordination. Khatri et al. 2012. 2.6 Marriage pattern and the institutionalization of patriarchy and male dominance. Patriarchy and male dominance as related twin concepts are reflected in the institution of marriage. Marriages in India are mostly solemnized in the form of some kind of arrangement between the bride givers and bride takers. In such arranged marriages, the consent of the boy and girl are not that important as that of their household heads or patriarchs. This is also a reflection of patriarchal mindset. Kate Millett, in her work on sexual politics, has tried to define patriarchy in two ways: I, male dominating female, and E, older males dominating younger male and female. Therefore, the notion of arranged marriage is a conceptual outcome of the older males dominating younger male and females on the question of choosing their prospective brides and grooms. Deepankar Gupta, while analyzing the Hindu marriage pattern, states that the notion of arranged marriage is still the norm in modern India, whether in rural or urban settings. We are all aware of the consequences in the form of khap and caste panchayat diktats that a young couple has to face in the event of marrying by his or her own choice. Gupta further argues that such arranged marriages are based on the notion of inequality between the bride givers and bride takers. A kind of hierarchy is set based on the notion of male dominance, which is evident in the form of bride takers having a superior status than the bride givers. This male dominance and inequality gets reflected in certain marriage ceremonies like Pau Puja, worshipping the feet of the groom, which the father of the bride giver has to perform. This reflects a kind of ritual hierarchy. The notion of male dominance also gets reflected through the Kanyadan, giving away the virgin girl to the groom's family in the form of a gift complex. This is considered to be the gift of the highest order that cannot be matched by any other kind. This sets a hierarchical relationship between bride giver and bride taker. The two categories of bride givers and bride takers as outlined by Dipankar Gupta can also be understood in the form of institutionalization of patriarchy and male dominance, where not only the male that is dominating and having a superior status but the female of the bride taker's side, especially the mother-in-law of the bride, becomes an agency of negotiating power in a household. This is an excellent example of how patriarchy and male dominance is so ingrained in the social structure that it takes different forms to get manifested through power sharing on the issues of production and reproduction. The very process of giving birth to a male child places the woman on the bride taker's side. This is also the reason that even women long for a male child. The control of mother-in-law over the bride's household activities is a clear manifestation of her acquired status of a bride taker. Gupta 2001. 2.7 Summary. It is now important to have a panoramic view of the twin concepts of patriarchy and male dominance. To start with, this unit dealt with the present issue of the kind of treatment that is given to women in our society. The unit opens with a debate on the position of women in terms of their rights and privileges. Recent examples of molestation and property inheritance rules became the backdrop through which patriarchal structure can be understood. We also discussed that how state acts as an extension of the general patriarchal mindset in the form of property inheritance rules and acts that are to some extent skewed towards male members of the society. The next section of this unit tried to explain how patriarchy as a social organization principle emerged at the first place. This question has been answered by different schools of feminist thought. Liberal feminists focused more on the issue of individual rights of female and are of the view that women can only be liberated from the clutches of patriarchy through the process of individual participation in the public and political domain. However, this view has been criticized on the grounds that it does not explain the origin of patriarchy and is individual-centric, thus neglecting the structural design of patriarchy. The shortcomings of liberal feminism are taken care of by the Marxist feminist thought. According to the Marxist feminism, the world historic defeat of women began with the advent of private property. Marxists focused more on the issue of relations of production and how women are placed within this structure. However, they are criticized for just adding women to their already existing theory of class struggle and have nothing new to offer in terms of the establishment of patriarchy. They are also criticized on the ground that patriarchy and male dominance was present even before the advent of private property, and it is the basic nature of women being considered as a basic form of exchange that gave birth to the control of their productive and reproductive capacities. The control over the sexuality of women formed the basis for the radical and revolutionary feminist scholars. They are of the view that it is the psychological and social meaning that is accorded to the notion of motherhood that brought about the control over the female sexuality. It is the social extension of the role of motherhood to child rearing that brought about their confinement to the four walls of the house and thus control over their productive and reproductive capacities. Then we moved on to understand that how in the context of India patriarchy became established. In this section we started with the example and evidence from the hunting-gathering stage and moved on to the Vedic and post-Vedic period, where state also became an instrument for upholding patriarchy and male dominance. Further, we understood that how kinship structures in the form of patriarchality and the Hindu marriage patterns have inbuilt patriarchal structures. This has been explained with the help of certain examples. In a nutshell, it can said that one has to be very observant in order to decipher more such models based on patriarchy and male dominance. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.